Let me tell you a story about how karma never forgets a debt. Chapter 1. The Celebration. The evening was meant to be a joyous occasion. I had planned a celebration at one of the finest rooftop restaurants in the city. The skyline shimmered under the soft glow of city lights, and laughter echoed in the air. My older cousin Lucas was reveling in his latest business conquest, boasting about an extravagant deal that had made him a fortune. His wife, Eva, and their son, Liam, were present, along with my Aunt Margaret. The only person who seemed truly present aside from me was Liam, a bright 10-year-old who still saw the world with curiosity rather than cynicism. As we enjoyed our meal, I noticed an elderly woman outside the restaurant, her frail body wrapped in layers of mismatched fabric, clutching a worn-out bag. Her eyes held a quiet dignity, despite her evident hardship. Moved by the sight, I signaled the waiter to pack an extra meal for her. It was a small act, something I had done before without thought. But tonight Lucas noticed. "Still playing the hero, huh?" he chuckled loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "Trying to make up for all those years of bad decisions?" I ignored him, turning my attention back to Liam's stories about his latest school project. But Lucas wasn't done. "You know," he continued, his voice thick with amusement, "you always try so hard to look like the better person. Is it guilt? Or do you just like pretending you're not the failure of the family?" His words hung in the air, laced with venom. Eva smirked. My aunt nervously adjusted her napkin, avoiding my gaze. But Liam? He had gone completely silent, his eyes darting between us, taking it all in. When the food arrived, I stood up, took the neatly packed meal, and walked outside. The old woman looked at me with cautious eyes until I placed the meal in her hands. "Thank you, dear," she said softly. "People like you make the world a little less cruel." Behind me, laughter erupted from our table. Lucas was enjoying his moment of humiliation at my expense. "Even the homeless have more value than you," he called out. "At least they don't pretend." I turned back to the woman and handed her my business card. "If you ever need help, find me," I said. And with that, I walked back in, finished my meal in silence, and left. Lucas had no idea that his world was about to come crashing down. But karma never forgets a debt. As I walked back to my apartment, my mind raced with thoughts, not of my cousin's insults, but of the peculiar way he had been speaking. His arrogance had always been a staple of his personality, but this time, it had an edge of desperation. His laughter had felt forced, his boasts more exaggerated than usual. Something was off. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over. Lucas always prided himself on being in control, yet tonight, his words were laced with unease, as if he was trying to convince himself of something. The next morning, I decided to dig deeper. Lucas had always been secretive about his business dealings, keeping everyone, even family, at arm's length. But what if there was more to his bravado? I made a few discreet calls, reaching out to old contacts in the financial world, friends who owed me favors. What I found was disturbing. The company Lucas claimed to be thriving was, in fact, hemorrhaging money. The so-called big deal he had closed was nothing but smoke and mirrors, a carefully constructed illusion to maintain his image. Funds were missing, rerouted to offshore accounts. Millions had vanished. Then an email arrived. The subject line was simple: "We need to talk." It was from Evelyn, one of the senior accountants at the company. What she revealed during our call made my blood run cold. Lucas had been siphoning money from the company for years, rerouting funds into personal accounts disguised as consulting fees. Millions had vanished. And the best part? Some of those investments were my own. Every time I had believed I was supporting the family business, I had, in reality, been fueling his deception. "You need to see this for yourself," Evelyn said, forwarding me a file containing bank statements, suspicious transactions, and internal emails. "He's in deep. If the board finds out, he's done." I sat in silence after the call, staring at my reflection in the darkened window. Lucas had spent years tearing me down, branding me as the failure. But in the end, the only fraud in the family was him. And he had no idea that his reckoning had already begun. The following day, I paid a visit to the company headquarters. The building, sleek and modern, was a testament to my family's supposed success. But beneath the polished marble floors and glass walls, there were cracks no one wanted to acknowledge. As I walked through the halls, I noticed employees whispering, their eyes darting toward Lucas's office. Something was wrong. The tension in the air was palpable. Evelyn met me near the elevator, her face pale. "He knows someone is looking into him," she whispered. "He's been acting erratic all morning." "Perfect. I entered the boardroom where a meeting was already in progress. Lucas sat at the head of the table, his usual smug expression replaced with a mask of forced confidence. When he saw me, his jaw tightened. "What the hell are you doing here?" I took a seat, placing the folder of documents on the table. "Oh, I just thought I'd sit in. Since, I've apparently been such a failure at managing my investments." His eyes flickered to the folder. A bead of sweat formed on his forehead. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" I opened the folder, sliding the papers toward the other board members. "I'd say these financial records paint a pretty clear picture. And I have a feeling the SEC would be very interested in taking a look." The color drained from his face. Silence filled the room. And then chaos erupted. Lucas tried to argue, but the board members were already flipping through the evidence, their murmurs turning into heated accusations. His once loyal allies were now distancing themselves, refusing to be dragged down with him. I leaned back in my chair, watching as the empire he had built on lies began to collapse. And this was just the beginning. Chapter 2: The Fallout. The boardroom descended into chaos as accusations flew across the table. Lucas scrambled for excuses, his carefully crafted persona crumbling with every word. His voice, once commanding, now carried an unmistakable tremor of fear. I watched in silence as his allies, sensing the inevitable downfall, withdrew their support. The board members, previously complicit in his arrogance, now turned on him like vultures sensing a wounded prey. His empire was not just collapsing, it was imploding. Eliza, the head accountant, leaned forward, her normally calm expression twisted with anger. "Lucas, these documents clearly show millions siphoned into offshore accounts. Do you deny it?" Lucas slammed a fist on the table. "This is ridiculous. It's a smear campaign. Who brought this garbage in here?" His eyes darted to me, blazing with barely contained fury. I met his gaze, unflinching. "It's called evidence, Lucas. And it speaks for itself." A murmur of agreement swept through the room. The chairman, an elderly man who had been our father's longtime business partner, finally spoke. "Lucas, these accusations are serious. If proven true, they could lead to criminal charges. You need to explain yourself." Sweat beaded on Lucas's forehead. "I don't have to explain anything. This company is mine. I built it up when everyone else failed. You all profited from my risks." "By risks, you mean theft?" Another board member snapped. "Because that's what it looks like." The room went silent. Lucas's breathing was heavy, his hands clenched into fists. His world was caving in and he knew it. Then the doors burst open. A group of men in dark suits entered. The SEC had arrived. Panic set in. The boardroom, once a place where Lucas reigned supreme, had become his courtroom. And the verdict was imminent. The lead investigator held up a badge. "Lucas Donovan, we have a warrant for your arrest. You're being charged with financial fraud, embezzlement, and falsification of records. Please stand up." Lucas bolted from his seat, knocking over a chair. "This is a mistake. You don't know what you're doing." Two agents seized him before he could make it to the door. His desperate struggle only made the moment more pathetic. As they placed handcuffs around his wrists, his gaze locked onto mine, filled with seething hatred. "You did this," he hissed. "You think you're better than me? You're nothing." I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "No, Lucas. You did this to yourself. I just stopped you from ruining more lives." The room watched in stunned silence as he was escorted out, his shouts of protest echoing down the hall. For the first time in years, the weight he had held over me vanished. But I knew this was far from over. Lucas might be gone, but the damage he had caused was only beginning to unravel. And the secrets buried beneath his lies? They were far more dangerous than I had anticipated. Chapter 3: The Reckoning. The silence that followed Lucas's arrest was deafening. The boardroom remained frozen, as if time itself had stopped in disbelief. No one moved, no one spoke. The weight of what had just happened settled like a thick fog over the room. Eliza broke the silence first. "We need to act fast. The authorities will seize accounts, and if we don't make the right moves now, the company could go under." I nodded, already thinking ahead. "We need to get ahead of this. Damage control starts now. We need a full audit, a financial reset, and a public statement before the media paints their own story." The chairman, still pale from the ordeal, cleared his throat. "And who exactly is going to lead that charge?" His eyes settled on me. I knew what was coming before he even said it. "You want me to take over?" A collective murmur swept through the board. "You're the only one who can," Eliza said. "You're the only one who isn't tainted by this." You've always been on the outside, but maybe that's exactly what we need now. I took a deep breath, the gravity of the moment pressing down on me. Lucas's empire was in ruins, but in its destruction lay an opportunity to rebuild, properly this time. But taking control of the family business was never my goal. I had spent years carving my own path, free from their corruption. I'll do it, I finally said, but only under my terms. No more backroom deals, no more unchecked power. We rebuild this company with integrity or not at all. The chairman exhaled in relief. Then we have work to do. That evening as I walked out of the office, I was met with a sight that made my heart clench. Hazel stood near the entrance, her small frame curled in on itself. Uncle, is my dad going to jail forever? I knelt beside her. I don't know, Hazel. But no matter what happens, you have me. You're not alone. She wiped her eyes and looked up at me with a sad smile. I know. For the first time in a long time, I felt something unfamiliar in my chest. Hope. This was just the beginning of the reckoning, but maybe, just maybe, something good could come from the ashes. Chapter 4. Shadows of the Past. The following days were a whirlwind of meetings, press conferences, and relentless damage control. Every major news outlet was covering Lucas's downfall, dissecting every financial move he had ever made. The company's stocks had taken a brutal hit, and my first priority was stabilizing the wreckage he had left behind. I barely had time to breathe before an unexpected visitor arrived at my office. It was Isabella. She stood in the doorway, looking every bit the poised and polished woman she had always been, but there was something different this time. A crack in her mask. Desperation in her eyes. We need to talk, she said, stepping inside before I could protest. I exhaled sharply and gestured for her to sit. I'm surprised you're still in town. Figured you'd be halfway to Europe with whatever money you managed to hide. She scoffed. You think I don't know what Lucas did? I warned him. I begged him to stop before it got to this point, but he never listened. I crossed my arms, unimpressed. And now you're here. What? To plead for his innocence? To ask for money? Her face darkened. You don't get it, do you? There's more to this than just Lucas's greed. There are people out there who won't just let this go. People who were part of his schemes, powerful people. And now that Lucas is out of the picture, they'll come for you. A chill ran down my spine. Who are you talking about? She glanced at the door before lowering her voice. Investors. Partners. People who had a stake in Lucas's dealings. People who don't like unfinished business. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. So what, are you warning me out of the kindness of your heart? She hesitated. I don't want Hazel to get caught in the crossfire. She's the only thing that ever truly mattered to me. I studied her carefully. Despite all the lies, the manipulation, and the games, I believed her about that. Hazel was the only innocent person in this mess. What do they want? I asked finally. Money. Silence. Maybe both. But they won't just sit back and let you dismantle what Lucas built. I felt the weight of her words settling over me. I had spent so much time fighting against Lucas, but now I realized he wasn't the only enemy. And if Isabella was right, the real danger was still ahead. That night as I left the office, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement, and every footstep behind me felt like a threat. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. Chapter 5. The Unseen Threat. The air felt heavier in the days that followed Isabella's warning. My instincts screamed that something was coming, but I didn't know when or from where. I doubled down on security at the office in my home, but paranoia gnawed at me. Then the first warning shot came. I was reviewing financial recovery plans in my office late one evening when my phone buzzed. A private number. Against my better judgment, I answered. A distorted voice crackled through the speaker. You're making dangerous moves. Walk away while you still can. I clenched my jaw. Who is this? Click. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, my pulse hammering in my ears. This wasn't just a veiled threat, it was a promise. The next morning, I received another message, this time in a more tangible form. As I stepped out of my car in front of the office, I noticed a black envelope tucked under my windshield wiper. I pulled it free and flipped it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message written in bold, block letters. Stop digging or you'll end up just like him. There was no signature, but I didn't need one. Lucas wasn't just greedy, he had been reckless. He had made deals with people who didn't forgive mistakes. And now they believed I was a problem that needed eliminating. Eliza and I pored over the company's financial records that evening, looking for any remaining ties to Lucas's hidden dealings. The more we uncovered, the clearer it became that Lucas hadn't just been stealing. He had been laundering money through shadow investors with deep pockets and dangerous reputations. Eliza paled as she read over a particular set of transactions. These aren't just investors. These are people who have real power outside of boardrooms. If we go public with this, we'll be putting ourselves in the crosshairs. I ran a hand over my face. We can't back down now. If we don't take control of this situation, they will. The office lights flickered for a brief second. We both froze. A coincidence, or something more sinister? I exchanged a look with Eliza. We need to be careful. That night I checked every lock in my house twice. The feeling of being watched had only intensified. I knew they were out there waiting for me to make the wrong move. But I wasn't going to stop. If Lucas had played with fire, then I was walking through the flames. And I intended to make it out alive. Chapter 6. Into the Fire. The threats weren't just warnings anymore, they were an active hunt. Every shadow felt like it concealed a pair of watching eyes, every quiet moment felt like the calm before a storm. But I refused to be chased into hiding. If they thought fear would stop me, they had underestimated just how far I was willing to go to set things right. The next morning, I met with Eliza in a private location, a small cafe far from the office where no one would expect us. I could see the tension in her shoulders as she slid a manila folder across the table. I did more digging, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas's dealings go deeper than we thought. He wasn't just laundering money, he was facilitating transactions for an international syndicate. I stiffened. You're telling me he was working with organized crime? She nodded gravely. And they're not happy about the exposure you're creating. They need you to stop. And if you don't, they'll stop you. Permanently. A chill ran down my spine. This was bigger than I'd imagined. It wasn't just about salvaging the company or clearing my name anymore. It was about survival. That night I got another call. No number. No voice this time, just the sound of breathing. Heavy. Menacing. Then a low chuckle before the line went dead. I gripped the phone tightly. They wanted me to know they were close. Hazel was waiting for me when I got home, sitting cross-legged on the living room couch. She looked up at me with worried eyes. Uncle, why do you look so scared? I forced a smile. I'm not scared, sweetheart. Just thinking about a lot of things. She frowned. Dad used to look like that before something bad happened. I crouched beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Nothing bad is going to happen. Not to you. I promise. But even as I said the words, I wasn't sure I believed them. Eliza and I had one last card to play. If we could uncover the full extent of Lucas's transactions and get it into the right hands, we might be able to turn the tables before they turned on us. But it was a dangerous game. And we were running out of time. Chapter 7. The trap is set. The walls were closing in. Every moment felt like a countdown, ticking steadily toward an inevitable confrontation. If Eliza and I were going to survive this, we needed to strike first, and strike hard. We have one shot at this, Eliza murmured as we sat in my dimly lit study, poring over the latest batch of documents. Lucas hid his tracks well, but if we can link these offshore accounts to the syndicate, we can expose everything. I nodded grimly. The question is, who do we trust to take this to? Eliza hesitated before pulling out a name. Detective Rain. She's been investigating financial crimes for years, but she's not on the syndicate's payroll. She might be our only chance. I leaned back, considering. Then we bring her in. But we need leverage. We need something so damning they can't just make it disappear. That night, my paranoia was at an all-time high. I parked 3 blocks away from my apartment, taking a different route home each time I moved. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. My phone buzzed. A text message. No name, just a single line. You're running out of time. Walk away. Asterisk. My blood ran cold. I looked around the empty street, but no one was there. Just the wind whispering through the alleyways. The next morning, Eliza and I set the trap. We arranged a meeting with Rain at a secluded diner on the edge of the city. If the syndicate was watching, they'd know something was happening, but we needed them to take the bait. Rain arrived, her sharp blue eyes scanning the room before she slid into the booth across from us. I hope you know what you're doing, she said quietly. If you're right about this, you've just put a target on all our backs. I slid a flash drive across the table. Then we don't have time to waste. She plugged it into her laptop, her face tightening as she scrolled through the files. This is enough to burn them to the ground. But they won't go down quietly. A loud crash interrupted us. The window beside us shattered as a masked figure lunged inside, gun drawn. "Get down!" Rain shouted, flipping the table as bullets ripped through the diner. Eliza and I hit the floor as chaos erupted around us. The syndicate had made their move, and the war had officially begun. Chapter 8. A Dangerous Alliance. The air was thick with smoke and the scent of gunpowder as I struggled to regain my bearings. The diner was in shambles, shattered glass, overturned tables and bullet-ridden walls. Eliza was crouched beside me, her breath ragged, her hands trembling. Detective Rain was already on her feet, gun drawn, scanning for threats. The masked shooter had vanished as quickly as they arrived, leaving behind nothing but destruction. But their message was clear. We weren't just being watched. We were being hunted. "We need to go," Rain snapped, hauling me up. "Now." Eliza and I exchanged a glance before scrambling out of the diner. We barely made it to Rain's unmarked car before the distant wail of sirens filled the air. We drove in silence for a while, weaving through back streets to avoid potential followers. My heart pounded as I tried to process what had just happened. "That wasn't just a warning shot," I finally said. "They were trying to kill us." Rain's jaw tightened. "They know we have something that can destroy them. That means we're out of time." "What's our next move?" Eliza asked, her voice steadier than I expected. Rain hesitated before answering. "We need help. And I know just the person. But you're not going to like it." An hour later, we arrived at a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Inside, the air was damp, and the flickering overhead lights barely illuminated the massive space. At the center stood a man I hadn't seen in years, Leo Vargas, an infamous fixer with ties to both law enforcement and the underworld. He looked up as we entered, a slow smirk spreading across his face. Well, if it isn't the prodigal son and his new friends. "We need protection," Rain said without preamble. "And information." Leo chuckled. "Protection costs money. And information costs even more." I stepped forward, meeting his gaze. "We have something that can take down the syndicate. But we need to stay alive long enough to use it. Can you help us or not?" Leo studied me for a long moment before exhaling sharply. "Fine. But this isn't a charity. You owe me." I nodded, knowing full well that a deal with Leo Vargas would come with a steep price. As we left the warehouse, my phone buzzed again. Another text. This one was different. "You think you're safe? You're already dead. Asterisk asterisk." I swallowed hard. The syndicate wasn't backing down. If anything, they were just getting started. Chapter 9. No Way Out. The drive back was suffocatingly silent. Every shadow on the street seemed to shift, every car behind us felt like a tale. My grip on the steering wheel tightened as I replayed Leo's words in my head. "You owe me." I knew those words would come back to haunt me, but for now we had bigger problems. The syndicate had declared war and we were running out of moves. "We can't keep running," Eliza said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "We won't," Rain replied, her jaw set in determination. We hit back. Hard. I sighed, forcing myself to think rationally. We need to be smart. If we go on the offensive without a plan, we're just giving them what they want, an excuse to make us disappear. Eliza pulled out the flash drive. "This is our best weapon. If we can get it into the right hands, they'll have no choice but to act." "And if they don't?" I asked. Rain exhaled sharply. "Then we take matters into our own hands." We holed up in an old safe house Rain knew about, an abandoned building on the outskirts of town. It was cold, damp, and barely livable, but at least we weren't being shot at. For now. I stayed up most of the night, going through the files, trying to make sense of them. Each piece of evidence painted a darker picture of the syndicate's reach. Government officials, law enforcement, corporate executives. They were everywhere. A knock at the door made me freeze. Eliza and Rain were already awake, guns drawn. I moved to the side and peeked through the peephole. Leo Vargas. I opened the door cautiously. "You shouldn't be here." He smirked. "And yet here I am. You're in deeper than you realize, kid. The syndicate isn't just coming for you, they've put a price on your heads." Eliza's eyes narrowed. "How much?" Leo's smirk faded. "Enough that every hired gun in the city will be looking for you by morning." A heavy silence fell over the room. We weren't just fighting the syndicate anymore. We were fighting everyone. I clenched my fist. "Then we make our next move count." Chapter 10. Endgame. The weight of everything we had uncovered pressed down on me like a vice. There was no turning back now. The syndicate had made its move, and it was time to make ours. Leo stood in the dimly lit room, arms crossed. "You want to take them down?" You need to do it publicly. They can silence a witness. They can make evidence disappear. But they can't erase something if the whole world is watching. Rain nodded. We leak everything. We go live. News networks, social media, everything. Eliza bit her lip. And how do we survive long enough to make that happen? Leo smirked. That's where I come in. The plan was reckless, dangerous, and possibly suicidal, but it was all we had. We set up at an abandoned TV station Leo had access to, tapping into a forgotten live broadcast feed. If everything worked, we'd expose the syndicate before they could silence us. The countdown began. 5 minutes. Rain watched the monitors as we queued up the files. We're going to have company soon. 4 minutes. Eliza checked her gun. Let them come. 3 minutes. Leo placed a hand on my shoulder. Once we do this, there's no undoing it. You ready? 2 minutes. A car screeched to a halt outside. Shadows moved. They had found us. 1 minute. Gunfire erupted, shattering windows. Rain and Eliza returned fire, holding them off. I pressed the final key on the keyboard, launching the files to every major network. It's live. I shouted. The world was watching. The syndicate crumbled within days. Arrests were made. Corrupt officials were exposed. The city was thrown into chaos as decades of hidden crimes came to light. Leo vanished into the wind as expected. Rain and Eliza went into protective custody, knowing that some enemies never truly disappear. And me? I walked away. For the first time in my life I was free. I stood on a quiet street watching the sun rise. A new beginning. Justice had been served. The war was over. For now. The end. Here is a lesson for all of us. Life is full of challenges, twists, and moments where you feel like giving up. But even in the darkest situations, staying strong, thinking smart, and holding on to hope can turn things around. No matter how tricky or negative a situation seems, there is always a way forward. Never let fear control your choices. Face adversity head-on and you will overcome it. If you enjoyed this story and found value in its lessons, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps spread these messages of resilience and determination to others. Stay strong, stay positive, and keep moving forward.